the fourth one I've done today, so I think I've got it down at this point. The purpose of this is for a couple different reasons. It's something I approached Russ about a little while ago, probably over the summer, as just maybe a good idea, kind of like a refresher for a lot of people that that we need to do. So the purpose of it is not to make anybody feel stupid if it's something you didn't know, or to waste anybody's time if you're like, yeah, I know all of this already. A lot of this is basics, common stuff that you've probably seen a million times before or heard a million times before, but it's still a good refresher. Maybe just a different way of seeing it, or a different reminder of some of the common errors and the common things that we see day to day. How this pertains to us, it's good for writing emails not only to clients. It's not just emails, it's proposals, it's meta descriptions, it's pages of content. A lot of our different services that we offer involve writing, which obviously entails using proper grammar. Another big reason that we wanted to put this together is it just helps our general company, the way we look, the way we appear on a more professional level to the outside customer base. So we don't want to come across as unprofessional. We don't want to look, in layman's terms, stupid to anybody. So if we're cutting down on mistakes, or if we're noticing them ahead of time and we can fix those errors, that's only going to shine us in a better light, which only helps our customer service, our sales interactions, and our closing of deals. So that's kind of where this all comes from. I know Emily DiLeonardo, she sent me a stat the other day when she knew I put this together, that she had recently read 14% of deals are lost when there's the client notices a spelling or grammar error inside the email. So right then and there, I mean, that's 14% of deals that we could be losing just from simple mistakes that get passed over. And that, again, it also translates to our service area when we're interacting with clients or if we're providing a service. So just keep that in mind throughout. This isn't just, again, just a sales technique or anything like that. This is for everybody. And again, a lot of this stuff I know you guys have seen before. If it's something you have seen all before, I apologize, but hopefully you take something away from it and it's a good refresher. It's pretty quick. It's not going to take too long. And I've tried to mix in some humor here and there, so hopefully you guys enjoy that part. There's really not a lot of questions just because these rules have been set in place forever. So you can't really bend the rules. So if you ask me a question like, well, can I do this? Can I do that? They're pretty black and gray answers, or black and white answers. It's yes or no. So we'll start. All right, so the purpose of grammar, what we're going to kind of talk about today, how this all pertains. Clarity of meaning, readability, and credibility. So that's what we'll be looking at. Just to start it off, so even if you see here, let's eat grandma. Just the simple addition of a comma completely changes the whole context of this sentence. One of them implies cannibalism. The other implies having your grandma over to eat dinner with her. So you could see how just a small thing like a comma can really change everything. And that's just one example. Okay, so types of errors. Wrong word errors, we're going to go over punctuation errors, usage errors. Those are kind of going to be what we're covering here. So wrong word errors. Spelling and typographic mistakes. This happens all the time. There's probably errors within this presentation. So it's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen for every single person. It's just trying to minimize them, notice them from the beginning so that they don't build up, and so that you're not making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Spelling mistakes, they're going to happen. Don't just rely on spell check. If you're only using spell check and you're not proofreading, you're not having somebody else take a look at what you're writing, chances are there's going to still be errors. Because sometimes things are spelled correctly, but maybe it's the wrong use of the word, or maybe it's the context is not correct. It's just completely out of context. So make sure you're not just using spell check. We'll get to some other ways you can kind of proofread yourself and things like that. But I know a lot of people just go, well, I ran it through spell check and it was fine. That's not always going to cover your ass. So you'll see there, even in the tweet that I copy and pasted here, have the courage to speak to me face to face, no fighting. Let's be adult and talk it out, or bury the hatchet. That's not how you spell bury the hatchet. So this person kind of looks like a dummy. Also be mindful of the wrong meaning. Again, best rule of thumb here, always goes down to the last bullet here. Just avoid it. If you're not sure what the word means, just don't use it. Use a different word. Just scrap it all together. Move on to something else. If you've heard a word used a lot and you want to use it in an email or something like that, especially a buzzword or something you think will grab somebody's attention, use a dictionary. Google is perfect. You can just type the word plus dictionary. It's always going to show up. So use your tools, use your resources around you. However, be careful. A lot of people like to use the thesaurus. I've seen this done a lot, especially within blog posts, pages of content that we have written even as a department. Trying to use the thesaurus just to make yourself sound smarter is not always the best thing, because sometimes you're going to use a word that will not be used correctly. It might be out of context. I'll let this video clip kind of explain what I mean. It's about 1.5 minutes long, so hopefully you guys enjoy it.
What you looking at? Oh, Monica Chandler's recommendation. I want it to sound smart, but I don't know any big words yet. Well, why don't you use your thesaurus? What I just said. Watch. Here, you highlight the word you want to change, go under Tools, and the thesaurus generates, it gives a whole list of choices. You can pick the word that sounds smartest. Oh my God, that's great. I'm smart. No, I'm brainy, bright, clever. I love this thing. It's my recommendation. Here. And I think you'll be very, very happy. Longest I ever spent on a computer without looking at porn. I don't understand. Some of the words a little too sophisticated for you.
It doesn't make any sense.
Of course it does. It's smart. I used a thesaurus. On every word? Yep.
What was this sentence originally?
Oh, they're warm, nice people with big hearts. And that became they're humid, prepossessing Homo sapiens with full-sized aortic pumps. Yeah, and hey, I really mean it too.
All right, so you guys get the idea there. It's sometimes just go with your gut instinct. So if the sentence you were thinking of might just be the better one to go with. If you're going to use the thesaurus, again, just double check, make sure everything makes sense, and don't just throw big words in there to make yourself come across as like, well, this sounds better if I use this word that I don't even know what it means. So, and again, watch out for words that are the wrong meaning. So. All right, so these are some commonly confused words. Again, you guys may have seen these all since 2nd grade, 3rd grade grammar school, but it's still important. And we see these errors continually made, and we're just trying to cut down on it, so hopefully this will help you out. So there, and there. There, they are is a contraction. There is the contraction of they are. There with an EI is the possession of something. So you could say, like, whose desk is it? It's theirs. That's an example. It's kind of a bad one, but whatever. There, THERE, is a location. So the car is parked over there. Your and your, again, this is a huge one I see all the time being mixed up. Your with the apostrophe RE is the contraction of you are. And your, Y-O-U-R, means possessive. So as you can see there in the examples, you are going to be a great writer, or your hair looks nice today. Also, in the cartoon there, it says grammar, it's the difference between knowing your shit and knowing your shit. So one of them is an insult, and one of them is a compliment. So you can see how the difference could be misinterpreted if you accidentally use the wrong one. Whose and whose. Who is a contraction again, and whose is the possession. So again, those are some commonly confused ones. A couple more. It's, and its. See this a lot. Its, apostrophe S, is a contraction of it is. And its, without an apostrophe, is the possessive. And if you're using an apostrophe after the S, that's not a word at all. So easy way to remember this is if you were to spell it out like it is, would it still make sense? Read it out that way. And if it does make sense, then great. If it doesn't make any sense, just make it a contraction or don't use it at all. So, and then effect and effect. This one happens a lot. Another easy mistake. Effect with an A is a verb, and effect with an E is a noun. So there's a couple examples there, but where you might see this is the new optimization will have a huge effect on your rankings. That's a noun. I changed your optimization to affect your rankings. That's with an A. That's a verb. So you can see how we would use that if you were communicating or talking with a client. If you use the wrong one, and it's somebody at a higher level within their company, they may read that and go, this person doesn't even know how to write this properly, and they're making changes to my website. So you can see kind of how some of these things may come into play. Again, all of these examples that I just showed here, they're not going to show up in spell check. So if you use affect and affect correctly, it strictly from a spelling standpoint, those are two words that are spelled correctly. So it doesn't always pick up context. Again, I just want to reiterate that over and over, that just using that alone isn't going to help you out. A couple more, to, and to. To is a preposition, to. Too is an adverb. It means also, or it may mean many, as in like an excessive amount. There are too many examples here. And to, the number 2. If you look at the tattoo there, unfortunately for this person, they have to walk around with this. Too young to die, too fast to live. The first twos are both incorrect on both arms. So this poor person. A lot, and a lot. As one word, A-L-O-T, that's not a word. So if you see that, don't use it. It should be two separate words, a lot, and a lot with two L's just means like we were allotted 20 tickets, or you've been allotted 20 support hours to use for your website, something like that. All right, so this is where it gets a little bit more confusing, or a little bit maybe some of the things you've never seen before, or if you have, that is a good refresher. So commas, use a comma and a coordinating conjunction together. These are for, and, nor, but, or, yet. So you can always remember the acronym fanboys. And that joins two independent clauses together. So the example there, the game was over, comma, but the crowd refused to leave. If you took out the but and the comma, those would still stand as two independent sentences, and that would be totally fine. So the game was over, the crowd refused to leave. Totally good. But if you add in a comma there, you have to add in the coordinating conjunction with it as well. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool. Also use commas after introductory clauses, phrases, or words that come before the main clause. So while I was eating is an introductory clause, the main clause being the cat scratched at the door. So they're two separate clauses. One of them introduces the other. You need a comma. And the last one, well, perhaps he meant no harm. Well being the word there. Another way you might see this is like somebody say, however, comma, blah, 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 blah.
Oh, comma does come after however.
Correct. Or yes or no. So if somebody said, hey, did you get that information I sent over? Yes, comma, I did, thank you for sending it, or something along those lines. Use a comma to separate three or more words, phrases, or clauses written in a series. So the example, the Constitution establishes the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. The three things there, legislative, executive, and judicial. So we're going to use a comma to separate those. There is a thing called the Oxford comma, which I didn't include in here because I didn't want to throw another thing into here, but it did come up earlier. Basically what that says is after the second one, so in this example after executive, you don't technically have to have a comma there. But if you don't, you just have to be consistent throughout. And you'll see that as a common theme here as we move along. It's just consistency. So if you go with it in one way, you have to stay that way throughout. So if you were to write another sentence, no comma again. If you were at another sentence, no comma again.
That strictly deals with the word and, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yep. And then use a comma to set apart a parenthetical phrase in a sentence. My friend Jessica, who lives in Connecticut, is a yoga teacher. So the parenthetical phrase here is who lives in Connecticut. If you were to remove that and the two commas in there, it's still a complete sentence. My friend Jessica is a yoga teacher. Who lives in Connecticut is modifying the subject, Jessica. That's why we have the commas in there. I know it sounds really confusing, but hopefully that clears it up. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, kind of the example? All right, semicolons. My general rule that I follow is I don't really use semicolons. I don't particularly like them. I'd rather just rewrite the sentence with a period or with a comma or something like that. But if you were to use them, make sure that you're using them properly. The most common way to use a semicolon is to connect two independent clauses. So the example here is the ice cream truck man drove by my home today. He had big hairy knuckles. So with a period, it sounds like this. The ice cream man drove by my house today. He had big hairy knuckles. So two sentences. With a semicolon, it sounds like this, though. The ice cream truck man drove by my house today. He had big, hairy knuckles. So you see the difference in the way it sounds? One of them is no pause, and the other one is a pause. So that's where you would use a semicolon. I would rather just use the period and write it out that way, but if you guys do choose to use them, go for it. That's how it should be properly used. When I send this out, I would recommend definitely taking a closer look at these particular slides here about the semicolon, because there are some other rules to follow. Like more complicated ones, and it's not something I'm 100% sure on, so I would say if you want to dive into it, take a look at it afterwards. But another area, though, where we might use it is the area where it says super. Use a semicolon as a super comma. So this is an area where we may actually practically use it. The example they have there, I know it's kind of hard to read and tiny, is for locations. So like we talked about before, where we're using a comma to separate a series of 3. They're using a semicolon here to separate a series of 3, Seattle, Washington, Tokyo, Japan, and London, England. So if we were writing a sentence to a client to describe the maybe geographical locations that we're targeting for their optimization or for their pay-per-click or for whatever the case may be, use a semicolon to separate the 3 actual locations.
Is that because there's a comma in between the city and the state?
Yes. So see right underneath, that's basically what it says. Yeah, use a semicolon if you need to make a list of items that are separated with a comma. This often occurs when listing locations, names, dates, and descriptions. So that's probably the most practical use of when we would use it as a company. All right, colons. Use a colon to introduce a list preceded by an independent clause, so a sentence and then a list that pertains to it. There's an example there, but the one I've been using today is your email includes the following pieces: a ranking report, a piece of content, and a traffic report. Does that make sense? So you would use a colon there when you're listing out the 3 things. And also use a colon to separate an independent clause and a final phrase or clause that illustrates, extends, or amplifies the preceding thought. So there's a couple examples there. I don't really have an example off the top of my head for that one. Everybody good so far? Am I going too fast? Everybody good? All right, cool. Okay, another oatmeal example here with apostrophes. All right, so for apostrophes, is it plural, meaning more than one? Do not use an apostrophe if it's plural. There's 2 exceptions to this, which we probably wouldn't use very much, but for your own knowledge. If it's a single letter word, for example, so in here they're talking about kittens, and if you wanted to describe the T's within kittens, you would say T's, T apostrophe S. You wouldn't spell it out TS. Or you could put quotations around the T's as well. The other example that we would see it more often, I guess, is when we're talking about numbers or abbreviations. So 90s fashion was a bit awkward. You would put an apostrophe before the 90s if you're talking about like that era of time or something like that. My grandma grew up in the 50s, something like that. So another area where we would definitely use an apostrophe is indicating possession. So right here, the example, Bob's hat was made out of jelly beans, apostrophe S for Bob. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We've all heard that before. If it's plural and possessive, then the apostrophe goes after the S. Unless it's a word that's already plural, like children is the plural of child. It would be children's and apostrophe S. But for the most part, if it's a plural ending in S, then it just goes on the end.
I have a question. So like Russell's office. So you would still do a third S with an apostrophe?
No,
right?
that would be Russell's. That wouldn't
Yeah,
be it.
so you would just end it
No, 'cause his name-
apostrophe, right?
What about Russ's office? That's what she's asking.
Yes, Russ.
Yeah,
Russ is.
Russ's.
Yeah, not Russell, but Russ is. I'll get to
Yeah.
that when it's coming right up. It's after these few. Is it a contraction? If it is, use an apostrophe. So cannot to can't, do not to don't, would not to wouldn't, should not to shouldn't, all those. Will not to won't, those are contractions. So make sure you're using an apostrophe there. I'm pretty sure that'll show up in spell check if you forget to use an apostrophe. Like if you just spell out DONT, it'll show as an error and you can correct it. But in case it doesn't, make sure you always use those. I know it's really easy to just be typing and you just forget, and You send it off, and then you realize afterwards, like, oh shoot, I didn't include an apostrophe there. But try your best. Its and its, we've already talked about those. Okay, so here's what Yaz was bringing up. So if it is a possessive name ending in s, Russ, you can use s apostrophe s or s apostrophe. Both are acceptable. You just need to, again, be consistent throughout the whole piece of writing. So whether that's an email, proposal, meta description, whatever, you just got to stay the same the whole time. Yeah. Does that make sense, Yaz?
Okay, so it's right either way.
Either way is right. Just use it the same way the whole time. Forever.
Only you can make it wrong.
So, okay, so is it a possessive and a plural name? The Johnsons is Moonwitch. Same thing. Put it after. All right, so mainly just to remember is possession, contractions. If it's a plural, don't just automatically use an apostrophe. So when in doubt, don't use an apostrophe unless it's one of those two things. If you're not sure, look it up, but don't just throw it in there, especially for those plural ones, because you think that's the way it should be. All right, almost wrapping up here, guys. Okay, so we're going to talk about fragments, which is in regards to sentences. A complete sentence must have three components: a subject, a predicate, which is a verb or an action, and a complete thought. So that means you can read it, it makes sense, stands alone on its own. A fragment is an incomplete sentence. So it doesn't stand on alone, it maybe doesn't make sense the way you read it, it's lacking some information, it may be lacking a subject, a verb, or both, or it's a dependent clause, which means it's a fragment and it stands alone. So some examples here: went out of business after Starbucks coffee opened. There's no subject there. What went out of business? One of my friends who won a contest by playing a variety of instrument. No context there. What are they talking about? That's not a sentence. And since I went fishing is a dependent clause. So if you just were to leave that there, that's a fragment. Now we see this most likely probably in like texting, pop-up, just the way we talk is a lot of fragments. But when you're writing things out, you still need to include a subject, you still need to include a verb, and the sentence needs to make sense. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. Okay, run-on sentences. A run-on sentence is a sentence comprised of two or more independent clauses and not properly separated. Excuse me. The last bullet there is probably one of the more important things. A run-on sentence is not just simply a long sentence. So if you see something and you're like, well, that's a really long sentence, I'm just going to automatically assume that's a run-on sentence and redo it. If you're following all the rules, you're good to go. So don't just think just because run-on doesn't necessarily always mean long. It goes back more to that first one where it's two or more clauses that aren't properly separated. That could be from a lack of punctuation or conjunctions that we talked about before. Incorrect punctuation, or extra, as Dave just said, which is most commonly referred to as a comma splice. And this is by far the error that I see the most, without a doubt, every single day. So a comma splice is two independent sentences that you're trying to form into one sentence by just adding in a comma. So what came up earlier today is somebody said, well, I thought the rule was if you take a pause or if you take a breath, that there should be a comma. That's not always the case. Sometimes there's punctuation that needs to be there instead. So I'll get to an example here. The comma splice. Expect comma to do the work of a period. Comma alone is not enough to show two different thoughts. So as you see here, this comma splice. My grades are very good this semester. My social life rate's only a C. You would take a pause there when you were reading this, but that should be a period and then a start of a new sentence. Or a contraction. Yeah, you would add in a but or an and. My grades are very good this semester, but my social life rate's only a C. So that would be correct. But just adding a comma, that's a comma splice. And that error comes up all the time. Just all the time. Just because the way we write and the way we talk and think, that's the way it naturally flows out of us because we think of that pause. So when you go back and read, if you know it's two independent sentences, then make it such or add a contraction. A few sentence is just completely joined together. You don't use anything. So as you can see there, I love this class. My teacher is a genius. After class, that should be a period and then the start of a new sentence. Make sense? Cool. Okay. Verb tense. Same thing, consistency. Verb tenses should always be consistent throughout your writing. So if you're starting with the present tense, stick with the present tense. If you're going to talk about something that happened before in the past, stick with the past throughout. It's not just the sentence, it's the whole body of work that you're writing. So if you write one paragraph in the past, like all in the past, make sure the next paragraph's all in the present. Be consistent, and I think it said be familiar with irregular verb forms. I think that's the last bullet there that's cut off. But yeah, and then that's just a fun pun that you guys can share with everybody today about what you learned. Does that make sense, everybody? All right. Tense shift examples. So these are some of the examples here. So about noon, the sky darkened. That's in the past. A breeze sprang up. That's in the past. And a low rumble announces the approaching storm. That's in the present. So it doesn't really make sense. If you read it, you're like, that sounds weird. That doesn't completely make sense. And that goes against the rule. So you could either change it to say a low rumble announced the approaching storm, or change the other ones to the sky darkens, a breeze springs up, and then leave announces. So that's kind of what that means. Subject-verb agreement. So singular subjects must have singular verbs, and plural subjects must have plural verbs. The rule of thumb, general rule of thumb here, is subjects ending in S are plural. Obviously, there's examples of the other one, child and children, we talked about, but for the most part, subjects ending in S are plural, and verbs ending in S are singular. So you want to correct those if you don't see them. Become familiar also with irregular verb forms, and always focus on the subject, not any additional modifiers. So some examples here of the errors would be the optimization templates belongs in CRM. What we need are more minions and cowboy memes. And the content department write a lot of blogs for enterprise clients. So the first one should be templates belong. The next one should be what we need is more minions and cowboys memes. And the content department writes a lot of blogs. So those are, and again, all examples of things that would never show up on a spell check. They may show up like if you have grammar rules set in place or on Grammarly or something like that, but if you're strictly just going spell check just to make sure your spelling's right, those aren't going to always show up.
Off the S's too on the menu? Oh, you got me here. I'm gonna ask.
No, because it's minion and cowboy. It's memes is the.
But you couldn't say this.
Like you would say, what we need is another minion and cowboy meme. Yeah, but we don't need those anyway. So, editing yourself. So this kind of wraps it up. Learn the rules. So just familiarize yourself with what the general rules are. We only scratch the surface. There's so much more that can be covered in terms of rules, and then you get into it can get really complex with writing and everything. But the basics is what we're going for, just to make sure that we sound and look, as I said, to start this off the best way possible. So learn the rules. The more you understand them, the more you familiarize yourself with them, it'll just become second nature. You'll see it. You can correct it. It won't take as much time. And you won't have to sit there going, okay, is it there or there? Is it there? You get used to it. Plan ahead. So leave enough time for yourself to edit. I know this is really hard. You're on a deadline for a page of content. You're writing an email, but you have to go to a meeting. The client needs this information by X amount of time and you forgot to do it. So I understand that sometimes there's not always enough time to edit, but plan ahead as best as you can. Even if it's just a couple extra minutes, that's always a good thing. With that, use the people around you. I send stuff to Kristen Sherwood all the time to just read it over, especially if I'm sending out a big email to a client or if I'm sending out a department email or something like that. Have somebody else take a look at it for you because they may pick up on something or see something that maybe you missed. People have sent me stuff all the time too, and I'm more than happy to do that. I know in the marketing department here, we do a proofreading process. So every blog that gets written is edited by 1 or 2 people before it even goes live. So know your writing weaknesses. Mine is the semicolons, so I know that, so I avoid it. I'm not going to just try to force it in there just because I think I need to. If you know you're unsure of something, then work around that or address it. This is a big one. Scott Malloy brought this up. This is what he does. He reads everything in reverse, which I've never done before, but I've heard it's a really good technique. The way your brain reads it, it just processes the information differently. When you read something forward, you might fill in the blanks, or you might go so fast that you kind of fill in words, and the context may be lost. But when you read it in reverse, we're not used to that, so you may pick up on things. Same with reading aloud. The way that you write something and the way you read it may be different. It's going to be different than the way somebody else does. So if you read it aloud, you may pick up on things more. It's hard to do at your desk for sure, but it's not a bad idea. And of course, don't be afraid to delete. If a sentence just isn't making sense or you can't get past a certain word to use, just delete it, start over.